Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Colab from Portal Dragon Games. And this is going to be a game designed by John Mietling from Palm Island and Palm Island the game, and then Jonathan Gilmour, who designed Dinosaur Island, and both those actually have the word island in them, now that I think about it. But that's neither here nor there. Colab is going to be not a cooperative game, despite what the name might imply. Colab has an aspect of working in labs, and it does have an aspect of utilizing your opponent's minions in this game, so you are collaborating to a certain degree as you send Eager over there to flip the switch, and your other mad scientist says, no, Eager, also grab me a vial while you're at it. That's the thematic stuff going on in my head as I play this game. But in Colab, before we get into the how to play, the basic overview of the game is you're trying to get as many points as possible, which is a standard thing for games. But you're going to be doing so by building out machines, monsters, and various alchemical potions into your grid, because you're going to have, each player is going to have a 4x4 grid in which they're building out these cards. And once a person builds their 12th card, that will trigger game end. So you have 4x4, which means potential 16 cards, but you're ultimately building out 12 cards into a little grid. And all these cards are going to do fun things. They're going to increase your in-game engine, letting you tweak with various abilities and do more stuff. And they're also going to give you points, which is how you win the game in this game. So you're going to be trying to build cards out into a grid, and the placement's going to matter because many cards, I'd say maybe half the cards in this deck are going to be better depending on what they are adjacent to, depending on what they're touching and what they're triggering as you play this out. So that's half the game. Playing all your creations into a grid. The tricky part is how do you play your creations, because every single card has a little resource cost on it, the little resource cost on the top right, which is going to indicate the number of resources it requires, which can be anywhere from as low as 4 resources to, I think the highest I've seen is 9 resources, but it could be, there's a lot of resources you might need to build out these cards. And that's where the laboratory comes into play. Because ultimately in the game, you're going to need to do two things. You're going to need to both get resources and then also get cards to actually play them. And that's where this whole laboratory is going to come into play, because let's go through a little bit of a turn structure. What you're going to have is, once you have the initial setup on the board, you're going to have various minions in different areas. I'm just going to go ahead and place it as if, we did the initial draft. So now we have, well, we shouldn't have this minion. Here we go. We have 2 of each minion on the board, and now we proceed with a typical player turn. And a typical player turn is going to work like this. You're going to take your minion, one of these minions, you're going to slot one of your dice into the minion, which is going to provide a useful resource to anyone who wants to utilize that minion, and you're going to put it on the board. And let's say I'm going to go ahead and slide this down over here. I'm not actually going to think through what makes sense so much as just doing stuff, so my actions here may be very inefficient. I'm going to slide this minion onto the board, and I'm going to take one of these 2 actions. In this case, I think I'm just going to grab a little monster card. Monster cards, because they are by far the best art in the game. All of the art in the game is gorgeous, but we'll talk about that. So I'm going to slide that minion onto the board, taking that monster card. Whenever you put a minion onto the board, you're going to take one of the 2 actions there, either the bottom or the top action. And to be clear, the top actions have 2 actions on them. You're taking either the bottom or the top 2. From there, I'm going to go ahead and pull back this minion over here, and we're going to go ahead, and I could choose any minion to pull back except for the one I just placed out. I'm going to pull back that minion, and again, take the action there. In this case, we're going to take a potion card, and we're going to go ahead and take a potion, which will be helpful later. You can store 1 potion on your player board, but your other potions are going to go onto cards in your grid to activate them. Some cards require potions to activate them. And then finally, once we're done with placing our minions are primarily going to be doing things like getting you resources or getting you cards. Those are what minions are going to do. You're then going to put out your mad scientist into the grid. Mad might be a little aggressive, but your scientist is going to go into the grid, into any of these laboratories. And I'm going to go ahead and put it over, I don't really love any of these places over here, but I'm going to go ahead and go over here. So when you place a minion into a lab, what you're effectively able to do, I'm just looking around here, yeah. When you place your scientist into a lab, you're going to either gather more things or you're going to start building your cards. It depends on which action you take. So if I gather, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get resources or do various things based on how that lab has developed and been built out. Because the labs are going to start with a few upgrades, but we're going to be slotting more and more upgrades into the lab as the game goes on. So maybe we put that action over there, and then slowly we build a level 2 one or whatnot. You actually have to build them all bottom up. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one over here first. You're going to slowly be building out these labs, adding more and more abilities on them. And when you visit a lab to gather, what you're going to do is you're going to count the number of minions, irrespective of the dice in them, and then generate that many actions on them. So over here, that's a 1 minion action, a 1 minion action, a 2 minion action. You're going to count up, so 3, and I have 3 points worth of actions to allocate towards the various abilities, which will often give me resources. In this case, I get a chip of any color. I'm going to go ahead and take a blue one. I'm not going to think too tactically around this. That's going to be how a gather action looks. We're going to go around and around, taking turns. Minions will move as the other players do their thing. and then I'm going to come back to the board and I'm going to go ahead and take a build action over here. Now when you take a build action, it's going to be slightly different because here the number of minions don't matter at all, rather the dice in the minions matter. Because in a build action, you're going to do two things. To begin with, you're going to add another tile to the board and you're going to put one. That's how you're going to slowly develop out these labs. Some other cards might do that as well, but the most common action of developing the labs is going to be taking a build action where you're going to upgrade the lab. From there, once I'm done upgrading, I'm going to go ahead and play a card or multiple cards depending on where I go. So for instance, in this lab, I can build up to 2 machine cards. In this lab, I can build 1 potion. And what you're going to do is you're going to look at the cards in your hand. Again, I don't actually have machine cards, but you're going to look at the cards in your hand. You're going to look at the resource costs in the top left, and then you're going to pay that resource cost with a combination of the dice in the minions in the lab adjacent to you, any dice you currently have on your player board, and any tokens. That's how you're going to pay for the cards, which means you're going to have to start thinking where your minions go on the board, because you don't actually use up this die. That die is available to anyone else who wants to use it on their turn as well. But you are going to be trying to manipulate where minions go, think about where your opponents have put their minions, what dice are on the board, which cards you're able to build, also slowly trying to put minions on and off the board, or taking gather actions to build up the resources so that ultimately you can start building out your grid, because that's where you're going to start placing things into your grid and taking actions based around the cards on them. They're going to be anything from, well, you can have points on a card, you can have the various actions. This is going to be a potion action where you can trigger once per turn. You can give up potions in order to take the action. You're going to have actions that are just generally ongoing or endgame points. You're going to have actions that trigger when you build a card. There's going to be actions that trigger, there's going to be cards that you put down that will trigger whenever you place cards next to them. A whole bunch of things, but that is the primary game. This whole game over here is one game. It's a resource optimization game. Let's get into the review part of this. So we have this game over here, which is going to be a resource optimization engine of trying to figure out how you can get all the resources you need. And then from there, you move to game 2, which is being played at the same time, where you're going to be doing a card optimization game where you try to figure out which cards will most synergize with each other, because card draw in this game is plentiful. And you can utilize the cards you don't need to go ahead and turn dice to the faces you want. Once per turn, you could discard various resources to turn a die to the face you need. And you're trying to figure out all that in order to say, well, I have all these, these monster cards over here. This monster card works well when I pair it with other monster cards all around it. So I want to start building monster cards, but that means this machine card over here that I want to build, it really is good, but there's not a good spot on the board without compromising on my current grid. So, but that is good. When I take a collect action, I trigger any card. There's going to be all these things you're trying to do in this game as you try to figure out what cards work best, what grid you're trying to build. Keeping in mind, there are giant stacks of cards here that you're only going to ever see small amounts of across the course of the game. There are multiples in those stacks, but nonetheless, you're going to go through entire games. I played this game like 3 or 4 times now, and I haven't seen a single, well, it's not true, I almost said I haven't seen a single repeat card. I've played this game multiple times now, and I've still not seen all the cards. In our last gameplay, I've still been seeing cards come out that I haven't seen before, all giving you new ways to think about how you want to manipulate the grid, which cards want to go next to each other in this game. And that is going to be my favorite part about Colab. In terms of things I like or all that, Colab has a lot of things going for it. To begin with, the art. The art is absolutely gorgeous. If you go through it, I mean, one of these particular cards, I'm going to go ahead and find it because it's just that worth it. Oh, you see, even here, I found Scott's Curse over here, which is another card that I haven't seen before. So just a good example here, because I've actually never really gone through these decks, but this HP Lovekins is by far the best card in the game. Granted, I haven't seen all the cards, but the art in the game, from the box art, from the character art, from the card art, is absolutely gorgeous. Now, when it comes to the art, there is something to be mindful of, which is the board does have a very dark aesthetic to it, which does make some symbols a little hard to see. Not enough to actually ever impact my gameplay negatively, but enough that I kind of want to call it out in case, like, if you're playing in a darker room, if you're playing with bad glare, if you're playing with people who just have not the best eyesight, the darkness in this game can make some symbols a little bit like, oh, what was that again? Again, not a big deal, but worth calling out at the same time. But past that call out, the art, like I said, is gorgeous. All the cards are a ton of fun to both look at as well as to actually play and benefit from as well. But the art is really just tangential to the gameplay itself, and the gameplay itself has things going for and against it. In terms of things going for it, I love the card engine of trying to figure out the puzzle of putting cards into my grid. Every single time I have a handful of cards, I want to play almost all of them. There's always like one card I don't care about, but the rest of them, I always want to play and put into my grid. Like, that will pair well with this. This will let me play this here, and then I'll start playing cards next to it and triggering it. But if I place it here, because I only have a 4x4 grid, I'm never actually going to trigger it 4 times, so maybe it's worth it to just go for points instead. Do I want to build up my engine? Do I want to cash in points mid-game? Do I want to go for endgame points? This card, played right, could be 12 points by the time you get to the end of the game. In a game that goes to 60 to 80 points, 12 points can be huge. but it also costs 9 resources, so you may spend 3, 4, 5 turns building up towards it. There's a balance of trying to figure out how your card grid is going to play out as you figure out which things pair well with each other in Collab. Now, when we move over here to this engine game, this game I feel less strongly about. I enjoy it. It's not that I don't enjoy it. Rather, this one gives you both these games over here, both the two games, the resource engine and the card engine, are going to present two different puzzles to solve. The difference between the two is I love the payoff that the amount of thinkiness that goes into the card engine gives me. The payoff here is a lot of fun as you put together stuff that score tons of points. Whereas over here in the engine here, you have to still think about it a lot. You have to think about, where am I going to move my minion? Where am I going to pull my minion from? Because this spot over here means I can play this card this turn, but this card isn't as beneficial to my grid. So do I want to take the card play this turn that will go straight into my grid, but it won't help me as much? Or do I want to take a turn or two to reset minions on the board and start gathering resources so I can play this far better card, which is going to get me more points, but it's going to take me 2 turns to set up? There's a lot of thinkiness back and forth as far as manipulating this grid, as far as getting the resources and setting up the turns you want, and I find that the payoff there is less rewarding. The two tie together, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, both these games are giving you a lot of game time and a lot of thinkiness, and the payoff on this resource grid, I wish there were a way to make it go faster, because you're constantly putting things on the board. I'm going to place this minion on the board over here, I'm going to pull this one back over here, I can't even get this one in, we're going to pull this one back over here, and then we're going to go ahead and put this, I want to take a gather action here, I'm going to gather that, and it's not going as fast as I might go here, because players are taking their time trying to think through not just this turn, but often 2 or 3 turns in advance, and then trying to count up all the costs on their cards to see if they can actually make it work. So it adds a degree of slowness to the game that works well. This game, I'd say a 3-player game is going to come in at around an hour and a half, maybe somewhere in that range. Roughly an hour and a half is going to be a 3-player game. 4 players is going to take longer because the 4th player, and also adds even more thinkiness to the board because you have more minions going on. Now, 2 players is going to take a back step because turns are going to be, your gameplay time to downtime is going to be better, but there's also less going on the board. So all these things are balances you're trying to figure out of what the best play count is. For myself, currently it's 3, but I haven't actually played a 2-player game yet, so I should take it into account. It does, by the way, worth noting now, it does have a solo mode, haven't played that either. But yeah, you're going to try and figure out this little puzzle of resources to build all the cards you want. It also doesn't help that and this is where the eyesight thing might come into play again, every single color resource, there's 3 colors you may have noticed, there's blue, there's red, there's purple, but every color has 2 types on it. So for example, if I go ahead and put this die over here, and I put that die over there, can you even tell that they're not the same symbol? And granted, you're looking at it from a camera top shot, far away, it's not in front of you. I can tell, but I have to make sure I'm looking at it correctly. The fonts are both small, although prototypes, so these things may change. But the fonts, the pictures are very small, but in general, just having 3 different colors and then each color having 2 resources types does add a degree of trying to think through, okay, well, I have the gears, I don't have the wrenches, I have the potions, not the leaves, and trying to think through which things you need to build out your cards. Again, the ultimate payoff is incredibly satisfying in the grid you produce. I do wish there were a way to streamline the actual lab mechanism over here to make things faster in the game. That's overall where I am with Collab. It has both high strategy in terms of lots of fun things to think through, but also slower downtime and a little bit more fiddliness than I would like in the lab mechanic aspect. In terms of final thoughts, ratings, all of that, overall Collab is a game that I'm simultaneously enjoying, but also want some aspects streamlined so that it is a game that I keep pulling out, as opposed to a game that I look at and think, I'll play something else today. Overall, the various upgrades in the lab, and again, prototype, things will change, everything's subject to change, and I know they're looking at the lab in terms of trying to figure out ways to keep the meat of it while also streamlining it. But some of the upgrades in the lab I find not as interesting, not as rewarding. You're building out the lab, you're slowly upgrading it, but I have found consistently that once we get to halfway through the game, we forget to even start adding upgrades to the labs because we're no longer even using them. At that point, we have enough of an engine going that we're just trying to focus on our card play, and gather actions are going to be few and far between. So there's a lot going on in this lab that is fun and strategic and gives you options, but also some things going on that aren't as interesting to me and had a lot more work with less payoff. The card engine is going to be the meat of Collab, the part that I really enjoy. If I were grading the card engine alone, this game would be a 4 out of 5. Because of the slowdown, 4 to 5, my rating scale is down below if you want to check it out. But a 4 to 5 is going to be a great game, one that I'm eager to dive back into. As far as the lab aspect of Collab, while I appreciate it's weird because I don't want them to get rid of it, because I like the I like the thought process of I put my minion here and it benefits you, and then you put your minion there and it benefits me. I like the thematic and also process of the mechanics of the game, but I also want it to be faster, streamlined, and also potentially maybe just a bit more interesting in terms of the decisions that go on here. To be clear, it's not the game time of Colab that has me scared off. An hour and a half for a 90-minute game is not a problem at all, but rather I want this 45-minute section of the game to be a drop more interesting as I go through it. Overall, where Colab stands now, it is a 3 out of 5 for me. It's one that I both want to dive back in and build out my card puzzle, but also one where I'm a little hesitant to do so because the lab aspect of the game is a drop less interesting to me. It's one that I'm certainly keeping an eye on to see where it goes throughout development, what changes are potentially made. It is a Kickstarter prototype, which means all things, components, gameplay, rules, all those things are subject to change. It's one that I want to see where it ends up and what can be streamlined around this to make the full package a 4 out of 5 for me. Until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Code. There'll be a link to the Kickstarter in the description down below, and as always, have a good one.